Becoming more familiar with the latest changes to FERPA. I'm Dina Lee, and I am currently at Marshall Middle School. So what is FERPA? FERPA is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. It's a federal law that protects the privacy of students and their educational records and their personal information contained therein. It requires that educational institutions protect that information and make sure that we don't divulge it to anyone. What's included in the Educational Records Privacy Act is the student's name and address, personal identifiers, social security numbers, student ID, indirect identifiers, personal characteristics. Some of the other things that are included are the name and address of family members, the social security numbers of the students, their birth date, where they were born. Personal easily identification markers are like a birthmark. They have green hair, a picture of the student, the use of a mobility device. Indirect identifiers of the student are considered date of birth, place of birth, parent's maiden name. All of those things are included in a student's personal records that is protected. What's not considered part of the educational record are the records that the teacher or administrators keep in their sole possession, meaning let's drop down further to the medical and or psychological records of a student under 18 years of age. So as the building social worker, I take notes, personal notes of my meetings with the student. I also bill Medicaid for notes and put in a billing note. So my personal notes that are kept separate from any school notes are not considered educational records. Those are my personal ones, and so they do not have to be divulged. Other things are records of a law enforcement unit of the educational institution. So let's say the city of Wichita partnered with Wichita Public Schools, and that officer who was working in the school took notes. That's not educational records. Other things that are included are employee records. So from our personnel file, things like that. So who can access educational records? Well, parents of the student who's under age 18, and once that student reaches the age of 18, then that ownership or liability transfers over to the student. So in some cases you have students who turn 18 when they are a senior in high school. In some cases as a junior, their ownership of their rights and their legal records turn over to them. Now there is a exception to that, is schools can release information to parents if that student is still listed as a dependent on the income tax forms. Higher educational institutions are examples of this, and school SROs are examples of this as well. A school safety resource officer. So what about law enforcement and the education unit or the school when we talk about FERPA? Well, law enforcement can have access to records if they are employees of the school district. So like I said before, we have the SRO officers that are district security officers, and they come into the school building and ask for a pupil identification form. We are allowed to give that to them because they are a employee of the district. A Wichita police officer can come in and they can ask for the records, but we can only give it to them if it is an emergency or a safety consideration is in effect. So if there's serious bodily or harm considered within the incident, or if somebody's safety is being considered. So for an example that I would use for that is releasing information for a wellness check, or releasing information about abuse and neglect. Those are serious concerns. Schools are safe havens, and we're not allowed to release immigration status about students or their parents when they enroll or make it a condition of enrollment or release that to law enforcement. Nor can we allow that student to be seen by law enforcement or immigration ICE when they're in the school if they're not a safety risk or concern. What about releasing information? We talk about release of information, signatures, and documents all the time. Well, the data transfers automatically to the student when they turn 18 or reach a higher education institution, as I said before. So in some cases, like that senior or junior who turns 18 during the school year, or sometimes a student graduates from high school and attends a further education institution before turning 18, that the ownership of their FERPA rights turn to them once they've graduated high school. If a teacher witnesses an incident on the playground or a fight, and they choose to talk about that with social media or with media, I would say don't do it. But if they choose to, then they are allowed to, because they were a witness to it and it came from real time. If that same incident was reported by a principal who had read that teacher's report, they may not talk about it. We've got to be mindful of social media and releasing information that we don't mean to. Taking pictures of students and posting them on social media that gives identifying information, listing birth dates, addresses, or celebrations, any identifiers we have to be very careful from. Now, again, as mentioned before, we can also release information to safety officials or law enforcement in safety and emergency situations. What about surveillance? Surveillance is becoming very popular, a commonplace in school settings. And how that is looked at is that it is okay to record areas of a building that are considered common grounds. Hallways, exterior, things like that. Areas that are not allowed to be recorded are things that are considered not public areas. So restrooms, classrooms, locker rooms, anywhere where there's a level of privacy that is implied. And a recording, for example, if a student walks down the hall and there's a fight, and we see the fight, we watch the video for the fight, and then we go back and review the information, and we see another student committing a infraction of the school rules. Let's say they throw a paper airplane or they flip another student off. We cannot punish the other students because we see them doing it on the recording when we're looking at it for the purposes of the fight. Doesn't mean we can't talk to the student. It just means that we can't punish them for it because we weren't looking at the video because of them throwing the paper airplane. So what do you do with the information once a student reaches the age of majority or they leave the school, or how do you destroy it? What do you do? Well, data destruction is the process of removing information in a way that renders it unreadable or irretrievable. Especially in the digital age, there have been cases where a waterlogged server can still retrieve information from it, or a burned server, you can still retrieve information from it. So you have to be really careful. What you can do is you can clear, purge, and destroy. So clear means that you reset the device back to its original factory settings. So think of like when you swipe on your iPhone to clear it to get a new phone. That would be clearing it. Purging the information is rendering that server not usable by putting a magnet to it or things like that. Destroying is like shred the paper documents or shred a disk or a file that you have. You want to make sure that it's permanently destroyed. So other things that you can do in your school, and we need to make sure that we do that, is I want to make sure that I raise awareness with staff members. I want to make sure that they understand how the FERPA policies apply to the schools and make sure they know what information they can release and what they can't. I want to make sure that our staff members know the rights and protections and all of the exceptions, especially those in the front office, because too many times our members of the child study teams are well aware of this information, but our teachers and office staff aren't. As a district, you want to make sure that you choose compliant vendors and make sure that they are not doing things like data mining and retrieving data from us unknowingly. We want to make sure we train all employees about FERPA. We want to implement policies and procedures that keep everybody safe. And most of all, districts, and my district included, we encrypt our emails and make sure that nobody can access them. We use a single sign-on so that I can access anything that the district has allowed me to use from anywhere as long as I utilize that single sign-on. And here are my references. Thank you for watching my presentation about FERPA.